Chapter 1. Ash of Dregmouth. The trees were blackened bones, and the sky above them hung like bruised flesh. Grogmaw trudged through the remains of the coastal forest, each step slow, deliberate, as if the ash underfoot might give way to something worse. The winds carried the stink of rot and sea salt, a mingling of decay and distant tides that clawed at his nose like ghosts of the dead. Charred branches reached toward him like skeletal fingers, brittle and lifeless, and every so often a gust of wind would shake loose a cascade of gray dust, falling like snow from some unconscious. He had walked for days since Dregmouth, and still he saw it. The fire, the screaming, the broken tower where he had bled and killed and stood alone. He had not spoken a word since. A pack of wolves had tried him 2 nights ago, starving things, little more than fur and ribs. He hadn't even drawn his cleaver, just snapped the lead wolf's spine with a backhand like it was made of driftwood. The rest scattered, yipping into the black. He hadn't followed. There was no hunger in him anymore, only the taste of soot and blood memory. The road became less a trail and more a scar, marked here and there by warped metal or melted stone. Grogmaw paused beside a shattered wagon wheel, its spokes twisted by fire. Something clung to the rim, flesh fused with iron, a hand blackened down to the bone. He crouched and stared at it. Not in revulsion, not even in pity, just recognition. The dead had faces now, voices. Not even time or fire could silence them. He moved on. It was midday when he saw the priest. A crooked hill rose from the ash field ahead, crowned with a dead oak that looked like a gallows. Beneath it stood a man in black robes, his back to Grogmaw, digging with methodical slowness. His shovel bit into ashen soil with a sound like cracking bones. Around him the earth was mounded with fresh graves, each marked with simple stones painted in charcoal, with a twin-tailed comet of more. The priest did not look up when Grogmaw approached. Perhaps he had heard the steps, the dull thunder of a half-ton of scarred ogre muscle moving through the wasteland, but he gave no sign of alarm. The dead did not fear the heavy-footed. Grogmaw stopped a few paces away, looming. The priest spoke without turning. "You're not the first. Survivors come through sometimes, usually broken, mostly hollow." "You don't look hollow." His voice was low, dry like old paper. "But maybe that's because you're full of something heavier." Bon said, "Nothing." The priest turned, slowly, revealing a lean face lined like cracked clay. His eyes were pale gray like smoke over water. No fear in them, just weight. He looked the ogre up and down, from the blackened cleaver strapped to his back to the seared gut plate marked by a blade that had burned deeper than metal. A half-moon cut shimmered across its surface, etched there by dark elven steel that sang with scream. "You were there," the priest said. Grogmaw nodded once. The priest held his gaze a moment longer, then simply gestured to the half-dug grave at his feet. "Another family. 3 of them. Too burnt to tell man from woman from child. But they were curled together when I found them. That's enough reason to give them rest." He returned to his digging. Without a word, Grogmaw stepped forward, sank his cleaver into the ground to mark the space, and dropped to one knee. With calloused hands like slabs of stone, he began to dig. Not with tools. His fingers were tools. He scooped the scorched earth, lifted stones, and tore stubborn roots out by the fistful. The priest did not thank him. There were no words between mourners. Hours passed. The sun slid westward, bleeding its last light through the hanging smoke. Together they dug 6 graves. They laid the dead down as gently as they could. One corpse still clutched a blackened toy soldier. Another wore the ruins of a wedding band, its silver fused into the skin. Grogmaw did not flinch. When it was done, the priest stood at the foot of the last grave and whispered rites, in a tongue older than the Empire. Grogmaw stood with his head bowed, eyes shut, the wind stirring his long mane of ash-caked hair. He did not understand the words, but he felt them, each one another stone laid atop his soul. After a time the priest turned to him. "You carry them," he said quietly. "Those you could not save, those you had to kill. You carry them in your silence." Grogmaw unfastened the gut plate from his belly. The burn from the witch-blade had blackened the steel, but in the center, faint lines remained, runes scratched by his own hand, one for each place, one for each lesson. He reached for his dagger, drew it with care, and carved a new mark beside the others, a vertical line crossed by 2 slashes. He did not need to name it aloud. Dregmouth. Then he took a small piece of the plate, just a shard barely larger than a coin, and placed it atop the mound of the last grave. A tribute. A memory. A burden left behind but not forgotten. The priest nodded. Without another word, Grogmaw turned and walked into the dying light, his shadow long and heavy across the ash. And the wind, rising again through the dead trees, sounded faintly like a whisper. Stand. Endure. Remember. Chapter 2. The Broken Prince. The road to Rebus Hold was marked with spears. Grogmaw passed them at dawn, ragged wooden poles jutting from the churned mud like teeth. On each hung something once human. Some skeletons were old, sun-bleached and rattling in the wind. Others still wept red. One had been a messenger, judging by the tattered satchel of scrolls tied to his ankle. Grogmaw did not stop. He had seen worse, and the vultures had work to finish. Ahead, the hills swelled like buried giants beneath the gray sky, rising into a jagged cliff where stone walls clung like a scar. Rebus Hold, they called it. Once a mercenary fortress, now the last sliver of a dying lord's dream. The towers were cracked. The banner on the highest keep, of black sunburst over crimson, hung limp, threadbare, stained with soot. The gates were open, but only slightly, like the maw of a beast too wounded to bite. 2 guards in mismatched plate watched Grogmaw approach, with expressions taut as bowstrings. One gripped a pike like it might save his life. The other fumbled to light a torch, though the sun was still creeping over the rocks. They didn't ask his name. Everyone in the keep had heard the stories. The silent wall. The ogre who stood. The butcher of Dregmouth. Most were lies. All of them were earned. They let him through without a word. Inside, Rebus Hold was less a castle and more a corpse. Soldiers drilled in the mud yard with blunt spears and hollow eyes. Courtiers, if they could be called that, moved like ghosts through the shattered halls. Old men with rusted chains of office, women in faded velvet dresses, turned threadbare at the cups. The air stank of oil, mildew, and desperation. They brought Grogmaw to the inner keep, a hall of stone columns and shattered windows, its once grand tapestries now moth-eaten and hanging like flayed skins. At the far end stood Lord Velkin de Rebus, barely more than a boy. He sat on a throne of salvaged marble, draped in a fur cloak far too large for his narrow shoulders. His hair was black and oiled, tied back with a leather cord, and his face bore the sharp, hungry lines of someone who had never known peace. A band of fresh scar tissue ran from brow to jaw, partially healed, poorly treated. The cut of a cleaver, or perhaps a war axe. He stood when Grogmaw entered. "You're larger than the stories." Grogmaw said nothing. He stood still in the ruined light, a wall of scarred flesh and iron, his cleaver strapped across his back, the mask of soot-stained metal hanging at his belt. Velkin descended from the dais, each step loud on the stone. His eyes never left the ogre's. "You're here because I asked for a weapon, My men brought me a legend. Let's see which one is real." Still, Grogmaw did not speak. Velkin circled him once. Up close, the Lord reeked of blood wine and sleeplessness. His hands twitched as he moved, not from fear, but anticipation. "I need more than swords. I need symbols," Velkin said. "The greenskins have taken everything from the villages east of the hills. My people fear me. They fear death. They fear that this," he gestured to the keep, "the shadows. This is the end." He stopped in front of Grogmaw, looking up into the ogre's weathered face. "I want them to fear you more than they fear death. I want you to stand at the walls. I want them to see that even monsters fight for me." The hall fell silent. Grogmaw finally spoke, voice deep and gravel-worn, like stone grinding on stone. "Symbols burned, like banners, like men." Velkin smiled thinly. "Then let the fire come." They put him at the gate the next morning. Not in armor. Not with a host, just him, bare-chested, his cleaver in the ground before him, arms folded across his barrel chest. Word spread through the hold like fever. The peasants came with bowed heads and wide eyes. Some flinched at the sight, others knelt. Mothers clutched children tight. Old men muttered prayers. Grogmaw stared at nothing, unmoving. By noon, the fear had begun to change. Not into comfort, but into conviction. Men whispered that where he stood, no enemy would cross, that the ogre had fought off raiders with his bare hands, that he had killed an entire warband in silence, one breath at a time. Stories bloomed like rot, unchecked. Velkin watched from his tower window, smiling like a man who had poured oil on the fire and now saw the first glow. That night, Grogmaw stood in Velkin's war tent, maps unfurled across the table, goblets untouched. "They'll test us within the week," Velkin said, gesturing to the eastern pass with a stained gauntlet. "Orcs. Black-armored bastards with a shaman among them. My scouts say they've enslaved ogres. Crude ones. Wild. Filthy." He looked at Grogmaw. "Not like you." Grogmaw stared down at the map. Blood had been spilt across this land for centuries. The lines of conquest and loss were thick enough to stain the parchment red. "Am I stay?" he asked. Velkin laughed. Not mockingly, but bitterly. "Because if I run, I'm just another prince in the mud. If I hold, maybe I become a king." He poured wine, but didn't drink it. His hand shook. "You're not just here to fight. You're here to show them the wall still stands, that men can still follow a name, even if it's not mine." Grogmaw reached for his gut plate, now blackened fully by time and fire, and pulled it off with a slow motion. He set it on the map like a weight. The runes scratched into its face caught the candlelight. Crooked, scarred, half forgotten. "Stand," he said, "but not for you." Velkin's smile vanished. "I'll take what I can get," the prince muttered. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. In the dark east, war drums began to beat. Chapter 3. Siege of Screaming Hill. The first horn sounded at dawn, a deep, wailing bellow that rolled over the broken hills like thunder through bone. From the battlements of Reba's hold, the world below writhed with green flesh and crude banners. The Skull-Teeth tribe, a mass of howling orcs, goblins, and lumbering trolls, gathered at the foot of the eastern rise. Among them, towering above the others, stood a monster of blackened iron and scars. Haka Skull-Twist. His armor was a patchwork of flensed steel plates bolted into his body with rusted spikes. Red handprints, made in blood, covered his chest plate, each one representing a war boss he had killed. A crown of shattered teeth hung from his waist. His left tusk had been snapped off at the root, leaving only a jagged stub. In one hand he carried a cleaver the size of a coffin door, in the other the severed head of one of Velkin's outriders, still dripping. The hill just outside the keep was steep and bare, no cover, no refuge, just blackened earth and jagged rock. It was where the orcs would come. Velkin had offered to fill it with pikemen, crossbowmen, stakes, and fire. Grogmaw said no. "Leave it to me." They watched him go alone. He walked barefoot into the rising light, cleaver in hand, the ash-streaked sky bleeding orange above. He said nothing, carried nothing. His only armor was the weight of silence and the iron of his skin. The gate shut behind him, with a sound like a tomb being sealed. He took his place atop the hill, where the wind howled like a dying beast, and waited. The orcs came like floodwater. The first wave rushed the slope, screaming, stomping, their jagged blades held high. Goblins skittered between their legs, hurling stones and rusted darts. A pair of squigs bounded ahead, drooling, eyes wild. At their center ran a hulking big Un, painted in crude red woad, wielding a pair of iron hatchets. Grogmaw didn't move until they were within reach. Then he charged. He hit the front line like a landslide. His cleaver swung in a slow, deliberate arc, catching the first orc across the chest. The blade didn't cut. It split. Bone, flesh, and armor tore apart with a sound like wet timbers snapping. The orc folded backward, still screaming, spine exposed. Grogmaw pivoted, dropped his shoulder, and crushed the goblin next to him beneath a boot the size of a man's chest. The thing popped like a gourd. A squig leapt. He grabbed it by the throat, wrenched its jaws apart with a single heave, and hurled the twitching halves back into the mob. Steel tore into his side, a goblin blade, little more than a jagged file, but he ignored it. His cleaver roared again, decapitating 3 in one swing. Blood misted the air in red arcs. More followed, shrieking war cries, tripping over the bodies of their kin. Grogmaw met them head-on, fists like hammers, knees breaking ribs, teeth shattering on his gut plate. By the time the first wave broke, the hill was slick with gore. A dozen corpses lay at his feet. Dozens more littered the slope below. Grogmaw stood at the summit, blood dripping from every inch of him, breathing like a dying bull. And the orcs screamed louder. Aka Skulltwist raised his cleaver and bellowed in his black tongue. A second wave charged, larger, heavier. 2 trolls lumbered behind, drooling acidic vomit, eyes glassy and stupid. Grogmaw roared this time. He met them halfway down the hill. He caught the first troll's club with both hands. It drove him to his knees, but he held. Bone cracked in his shoulder. He didn't scream. He rose, grunting, and drove his cleaver into the troll's gut. The blade bit deep, but not deep enough. The troll howled, slammed him with a backhand, and Grogmaw flew backwards, landing in a heap of corpses. Before he could rise, the second troll vomited, green filth splashing over his chest, smoking as it ate through cloth and skin alike. Grogmaw howled in pain, rolled aside as a club smashed down where his skull had been. His cleaver was gone. He reached for a broken spear, rolled to his feet, and threw it. The crude shaft took the troll in the throat. It staggered, gurgled, collapsed, twitching. The first troll lumbered toward him, blood and bile pouring from its gut. Grogmaw caught a rock the size of a dwarf's head and slammed it into the troll's knee with a sound like splintering ice. The beast dropped, howling. He mounted its back, grabbed the broken spear still lodged in its throat, and pushed, driving it deeper, wrenching it side to side, until warm fluid spilled in sheets and the thing fell still. He didn't hear the third wave coming. He felt it, through the earth, through the pain. The Black Orc war bus led them now. Haka charged up the hill like a siege tower come alive. His cleaver dragged through the dirt, sparking on rock. Dozens followed him, howling, crazed. Grogmaw staggered to his cleaver, tore it free from a corpse and turned. The two met like gods of slaughter. Haka's first strike shattered the air. Grogmaw ducked under it, brought his own blade up in a rising arc. Sparks flew, steel clanged. They circled, traded blows. Haka moved with terrifying speed for something so massive. He laughed, teeth yellow and cracked, even as Grogmaw's cleaver tore a line across his chest. "God rat!" he roared, bringing his cleaver down in a diagonal slash. Grogmaw blocked it with his forearm. The blade bit deep, bone showed. Still he fought. He headbutted the black orc, shattering part of his iron helm. Haka reeled. Grogmaw drove his cleaver into his side, but the war boss caught the haft, wrenched it free, and slammed a mailed fist into Grogmaw's face. Grogmaw went down hard. Blood spurted from his nose. One eye was already swelling shut. Haka raised his cleaver high, ready to end it. Then Grogmaw, half blind and bleeding, lunged, not for the blade, but for Haka's foot. He bet. Teeth sank through leather and flesh. Haka shrieked. Grogmaw pulled, wrenching the war boss off balance, and rose with a roar of pain and fury. He swung the cleaver in both hands, an upward arc, splitting Haka from groin to collarbone. The black orc dropped in two pieces, blood spraying across the hilltop. The third wave broke. What was left of the warband fled into the hills, screaming. Trolls wailed. Goblins scattered like insects. The battle was over. Grogmaw stood alone on Screaming Hill, swaying, bleeding from a dozen wounds. The wind howled around him. The sun, low and dying, cast his shadow across the corpses like the shadow of a god. He fell. They found him at dusk, lying in a pool of blood, half dead. He said nothing as they carried him back. Velkin watched from the gate, his expression unreadable. No cheers, no praise, just silence. But every man, woman, and child who saw the butchered hilltop, who smelled the blood and counted the corpses, knew one thing. The ogre stood when no one else could. And the wall did not fall. Chapter 4. Ghosts in Iron. Pain was the only constant. Grogmaw lay in the stone crypt beneath Rivas' hold, swathed in furs and damp linen bandages, soaked through with blood and ointments that stung like boiling oil. The scent of dried herbs and copper thickened the air. Rats skittered in the shadows of the alcoves, silent witnesses to his stillness. Every breath hurt. The wounds from the siege were slow to close. Splintered ribs, a shattered forearm, gouged flesh carved by rusted orc blades. The troll bile had left acid burns along his side that festered and wept yellow rot despite the healer's fumbling hands. Sleep came in broken fragments, chased away by the phantom roar of war drums and the memory of Haka's laughter. Outside, Ravashold endured. The people spoke his name with fear and reverence. The boy lord Velkan had ordered a statue commissioned, but the stonemasons had not begun. No one dared ask why the ogre had not risen yet. Then came the sound of boots. Not the soft scurry of men, nor the chaotic trample of greenskins. These were measured steps, weighted, like iron striking iron. Grogmaw opened one eye. They came in the evening, announced by a herald's bark and a procession of rumbling carts. A dwarfen caravan, 10 strong, rolled through the shattered gates of Rivas' hold, their wagons painted in deep blue and gold, marked with the sigils of Clan Durgrim. Traders, but not simple merchants, these were rune menders, armor binders, smiths of ancestral steel. Their banners hung heavy with age and soot, and among them walked Thoric Drengrim, eldest of the rune carvers, shoulders hunched under the weight of years, and etched stone tablets strapped to his back. He was blind in one eye. His beard was braided with iron wire and soot-blackened charms. A maul hung at his hip, not as a weapon, but a tool of sacred purpose. The air around him stank of ash, steel, and ink. When he was told the ogre still breathed in the crypts, he demanded to see him at once. The dwarfs came as dusk sank into stone. Grogmaw heard them before he saw them, the clink of metal, the scrape of hobnail boots. The thick scent of forge oil followed. When Thoric entered, he did not bow. He did not flinch. He studied the ogre with the scrutiny of a cracked anvil examining a cracked Grogmaw, he said, with the gravel of a man who chewed coal and washed it down with lava ale. They say you stood against a black orc warlord and did not fall. Grogmaw remained silent. His good eye flicked toward the old dwarf, then back to the dark stone above him. Thoric stepped closer. They say you fought for a man you do not respect, for a keep that is crumbling, and for people who will forget your name in a decade. He reached into his cloak and withdrew a flat iron slate, no longer than a dinner plate, carved with angular runes. He held it up. They also say you bear the marks of battle on your gut plate. Runes not of our making, but still runes. Symbols of memory. I saw one once, like yours, on the corpse of an ogre mercenary who died in Karak Guldar, fighting Skaven alongside our shield thanes. Yours are deeper, older. Theric knelt with a grunt. He placed the slate beside the bed, where Grogmaw's gut plate rested, scorched, blood-stained, cracked down one edge. The runes scratched into its belly were crude, yes, but deliberate, each a memory, each a name. Do you know what it means? Thoric muttered, to leave a mark in stone. He looked up, voice quieter now. It means the world changed because you stepped into it. Grogmaw slowly turned his head and spoke. Not enough, Thoric grunted, standing with a puff of old joints. So you do talk. I stood on a hill of bones, Grogmaw said, voice a rasp like a dying fire. But I couldn't save the ones screaming behind the walls. The ones who lived will carry your story, Thoric replied. No, they'll carry fear, fear of what I am. Thoric considered this. And that bothers you? Silence. Then, yes. Theric nodded, stepping to the gut plate. He ran a thick, scarred hand over the etched runes, each a crooked line, a crude memory of places and names. Dregmouth. Screaming Hill. The mark for the slain troll, scratched like a broken jaw. The symbol for silence, a diagonal line through a mouth. You know, the old dwarf said, tracing a finger along one rune. There's a tradition among the Karak keepers. When a warrior has no hall, no clan, and no line, but has proven his deeds, they are given a stone, not to be honored, to be remembered, to bear their burden in the hall of the nameless. He paused. I'd carve yours. No. Grogmar's voice had weight now. I'm not done walking. Thoric smiled faintly, like a forge sparking in the dark. Good. He turned to go. At the threshold he stopped. One day you'll have to choose. Let your name fade into fire, or leave a mark that outlasts even us. The dwarfs departed that night, their carts heavy with ore and secrets. They left behind one thing, a small stone tablet, unmarked, placed beside Grogmaw's gut plate. A gift. Or a challenge. Grogmaw stared at it for a long time, through the hours of aching breath and twitching muscle. His fingers brushed the edge once, rough and cold, and then drew back. He rolled onto his side with a groan, pressing his body against the stone floor, seeking its chill. Outside, the wind rose. And in his dreams, the runes on his gut plate whispered, not in words, but in weight. Chapter 5. Blightroot. The trees bled sap the color of bile. What was once the greenwood pass had turned rotten, its trunk swollen with cankers, bark split open like infected wounds, the ground squelched beneath Grogmaw's feet, soft with rot, breathing with unseen things. A wet mist hung low across the forest floor, thick as wool, stinking of meat left too long in the sun. Flies clung to every surface. They did not scatter as he passed. Grogmaw gritted his teeth. His bandage side itched with fever. The wounds from Screaming Hill festered slowly, healing, but never whole. The acid burns from troll vomit pulsed beneath his skin, sickly heat rising with each breath. He walked anyway, leaning on the haft of his cleaver like a crutch, eyes sharp in the dim half-light. The path narrowed, the air grew thicker. Then he saw it, a village, half swallowed by the trees. Its houses were squat things of sod and timber, their walls streaked with moss and yellow fungal growth. Doors hung crooked on rusted hinges. Smoke curled from chimneys that should have been cold. The earth between the buildings was pitted, sunken, as though the roots themselves had recoiled in disgust. And everywhere, bells. Small rusted bells, hanging from strings of human hair. They swayed in the still air, chiming softly with no wind. Grogmaw stepped into the village square. A figure waited there, beneath a crooked wooden arch painted with a crude, rotting sigil, 3 circles forming a bloated, unholy triangle. The mark of Nurgle. The figure was once a man. Now it was a thing of corpulent flesh and pus-swollen limbs, draped in the tatters of priestly robes. Its face had melted into a slack grin, the skin pocked with boils that oozed down its neck in rivulets. Flies danced in and out of its mouth, undisturbed. His voice was soft and wet. "Arsonist, the sufferer comes." Grogmaw stopped 5 paces away. The preacher's arm spread wide, revealing a swollen gut split down the center, barely held closed by rotted bandages and metal clasps. "You carry pain, giant. I see it. I smell it." His fingers curled. "I offer release. A gift of grandfather. A gift of stillness, of surrender. You needn't endure any more." From behind the houses, villagers emerged. They limped on twisted limbs, eyes crusted with yellow ichor, faces slack and dreaming, children with bloated heads and black tongues, elders whose spines twisted like knots. They ringed the square in silence, heads tilted like broken dolls. Grogmaw said nothing. The preacher waddled forward, grinning wider. "You have borne fire and blade, ogre. You have stood against the world's cruelty. Why? Why suffer for others who spit at your name? Let it go. Let the rot take root." He held up a palm. From the split in his belly, something squirmed, a slug the size of a rat, pale and wet, with tiny fingers along its sides. It chittered softly. "This," the preacher whispered, "this is peace. No more pain, only purpose. Let it nest in you." Grogmaw moved. His cleaver came up in a flash of rusted steel and split the slug in 2. The preacher stared in disbelief. Then Grogmaw struck again. The first blow took the preacher's left leg at the knee. The stump burst like a rotted fruit, spraying yellow filth across the ground. The cultist collapsed with a wet shriek, clutching at the spurting mess. Grogmaw loomed above him, silent. The preacher reached out, a bubbling whimper in his throat. Grogmaw drove the cleaver into his arm, severing it at the elbow. The man screamed again, his voice rising in a wet, high wail. The villagers watched, unmoving, as their prophet writhed and bled into the dirt. He dropped the cleaver and knelt. Grogmaw wrapped a hand around the preacher's bloated neck and squeezed, slowly, deliberately. Flesh popped under his fingers. Puce leaked from the preacher's eyes and mouth. His screams turned to gurgles, then to nothing. When the preacher stopped moving, Grogmaw held on a moment longer. Only then did he rise. The villagers stood motionless. He looked at them. No hate in his gaze. No pity. Then he turned, limped toward the small, decaying chapel at the village's heart. The door collapsed at his touch. Inside, the altar was made of bone. The walls pulsed with a living slime that whispered as it moved. A pile of rotting fruit and limbs lay before a statue of Nurgle, carved from meat and wood, its belly open in welcome. Grogmaw reached into the pouch at his belt. The torch was old, half-burned, wrapped in pitch-cloth and sealed with a gob of dwarfat. He struck flint into it. Once, twice, for spot. The flame took. He stared at it a moment, its light dancing in the black reflection of the chapel's corrupted altar. Then he dropped it. The fire spread with greedy hunger. The damp walls hissed and steamed. The slime screamed, actually screamed, as it blackened and bubbled. Smoke curled upward in choking, stinking clouds. Outside, the villagers did not run. They watched. As the chapel burned, Grogmaw limped past them. A child with a face like melted wax reached out to touch his leg. He paused, looked down, then stepped over the outstretched hand. By the time he reached the tree line, the chapel was a tower of flame. The bells rang wildly in the heat, mad and shrill. Grogmaw did not look back. He walked into the forest, into the mist, into the rot. But not a single fly dared land on him. Chapter 6. The Black Cross. The road into the Duchy of Miranth was lined with corpses. Grogmaw had seen enough war to know the signs. These weren't victims of battle, but butchery. Hung upside down from trees, throats slit, entrails spooling like garlands. Some bore signs of ritual mutilation, flayed skin shaped into crude crosses, black cross sigils carved into their foreheads. Bandits, deserters, or worse, peasants who'd resisted. Buzzards circled, flies swarmed. The silence was heavy. Mirtha had once been a borderland of vineyards, soft hills, and painted shrines to Myrmidia. Now it was a fractured duchy at war with itself. Petty nobles clawed at each other for scraps of soil, gold, and blood, each field another battlefield, each banner another lie. The mercenary company known as the Black Cross had found fertile ground here. They wore no uniforms, just crude, soot-blackened armbands tied over mismatched armor. Some bore feathers, others chainmail, some just boiled leather and a hunger in their eyes. Discipline was not expected, only obedience. Their symbol was burned into shields, stitched into cloaks, daubed in blood across doorways. Their leader was a man named Captain Bran Volker, a Tilean exile with the face of a vulture and the voice of a priest. His tongue was silver, but his justice was iron. When Grogmaw came limping into their camp, a hulking shadow covered in dried blood and burn scars, they welcomed him like they would a siege engine. Volker himself came to meet him, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, and the cold confidence of someone who'd seen the inside of too many burning churches. "I've heard of you," Volker said. "Dregmouth, Screaming Hill, the priest burner. You've got a talent for surviving things that kill better men." Grogmaw stood still, cleavers strapped across his back, a hard stare fixed beneath his brow. "We have work," Volker continued. "A town 2 leagues south holds grain and a cache of black powder. It's resisting. We'll break them. I want you at the front when the gates fall. He offered a leather pouch, the clink of gold inside. Grogmaw didn't move. "What do you fight for?" Volker asked, smile thin. "Honor? A name? Don't insult me. This is the world now. You take what you can, or you die." Grogmaw turned, wordless, and walked away. Olger watched him go with narrowed eyes. He made camp at the edge of the forest, alone, as always. That night, smoke rose in the east. The town had fallen. Grogmaw heard the screams. He heard the laughter. He heard the whimpers of those who hadn't died quickly enough. He did nothing until the next morning. A boy, no more than 10, stumbled into Grogmaw's camp, barefoot, bleeding from torn soles. His eyes were wild, lips cracked, arms covered in lash marks. He wore a rusted chain around his neck. When he saw Grogmaw, he flinched, but he did not run. "Believe me, they took my sister," the boy whispered. "The ones with the black armbands. They said they'd make her an example." He pointed with a shaking hand toward the smoke, then collapsed in the dirt. Grogmaw entered the Black Cross camp at midnight. There were no war cries, no boasts, no challenge. Just a slow, quiet walk beneath the stars. The first sentry never even turned. One moment he was standing by a torch, the next a cleaver cleaved through his spine and split him down the middle. His body folded like paper, intestines uncoiling at his feet. The second screamed, but only once. Grogmaw's fist crushed his jaw and shattered his skull against a tree. By the time the alarm was raised, the slaughter had begun. Grogmaw moved through the camp like a reaper carved from stone. A squad of crossbowmen fired, bolts thudding into his chest and arms. He didn't stop. He barreled through them, cleaver spinning, bones shattering. One man tried to run. Grogmaw caught him by the ankle and used him as a bludgeon against another. The tent caught fire. Then another. In the chaos, Captain Volker emerged from his command pavilion, sword in hand, armor gleaming with silver inlays. You dare?" Grogmaw hurled his severed leg at him. Volker staggered, and then the ogre was on him. Steel clashed. Volker was fast, nimble, striking low and precise. He scored a line across Grogmaw's thigh, another across his ribs. Grogmaw grunted. Then he grabbed the Telean sword arm mid-swing. There was a sound like dry wood snapping. Volker screamed. Grogmaw didn't stop, and lifted the captain by his broken limb and slammed him down onto a supply cart. The wood shattered beneath the impact. Volker gasped, blood in his mouth, ribs shattered. He clawed for a dagger. Grogmaw knelt beside him, pin pressed, one massive hand on the man's chest, slowly crushing. Volker coughed, gurgled. "You think this makes you righteous?" he spat, bloodied teeth bared. "We're all bastards now. You're no better." Grogla leaned in close. "No," he growled. "But you're done." He pushed. Ribs gave way like wet parchment. Lungs collapsed. Heart burst. When Grogmaw rose, Volker's body was caved in like a crushed kettle. The fire spread. The last mercenaries fled screaming into the trees. Grogmaw made no chase. He walked through the smoldering camp, ignoring the coins spilling from overturned coffers, the weapons glinting in the firelight. He found the girl, alive, barely, tied to a post in the supply tent, mouth gagged, face bruised but eyes burning. He cut her free, carried her in one arm. The boy still waited at the edge of the woods, eyes wide, frozen in fear. Grogmaw handed her to him gently, then turned and walked back into the night, smoke trailing behind him like a... He did not look back, and he did not bury the dead. Chapter 7. Salt and the Sword. The smell of salt, fish guts, and perfume clung to the air like mold. Portvencia, nestled between the rotting coastline of the Talayan border and the fractured empire, was a city built on trade and treachery. White stone walls ringed the harbor like broken teeth, and towering villas sat perched above the docks like vultures waiting for cargo to rot. Every street was a tangle of sharp turns, shuttered windows, and whispers, where merchants spoke in gold tongues and thieves in dagger points. Grogmaw entered beneath the southern gate at dawn, his silhouette black against the rising sun, a cleaver slung over one shoulder and dried blood crusted into his mail. He moved like a storm cloud, slow, massive, and heavy, with the promise of ruin. The city guards let him pass without a word. An ogre bearing scars like his didn't need permission. He found a corner in the docklands, near the salt markets, where crates of dried eels and pickled squids stank in the morning heat, and sat in silence. Within minutes, word of his arrival spread like spilled wine. By midday, offers came. He ignored them all, until the boy came. A liveried messenger, thin as wire and sweating through his silks, bowed with forced politeness. His Lordship Valsera d'Orlano wishes to employ your expertise. A matter of security, coin provided in advance. Grogmaw didn't speak. He stood, towering over the boy, and walked. Valsera's estate was nestled in the city's inner ring, behind spiked iron gates and flanked by stone lions. The noble himself was a thin man with perfect hair and teeth too white for someone born in Portvencia. He wore rings on every finger and a robe stitched with thread of gold, but his eyes were those of a desperate gambler. My warehouse, Valsera explained, pacing, has recently come under threat. Attacks, sabotage, explosions from beneath. The local smuggler guilds, salt jackals, hook hands, they're brutes, but they don't tunnel. He waved a hand. I need a wall, one that bites. You'll be paid to stand. Grogmaw nodded once. No questions. The warehouse sat on the edge of the industrial quarter, where tar and pitch soaked the ground and gulls screamed like dying men. Its lower levels were old, too old, constructed atop the remnants of an older city long buried. Even the rats here looked sick. Grogmaw arrived at nightfall. The guards were lean, wide-eyed men with fingers always on hilts. They barely acknowledged him. He took position inside, behind the rows of crates and rusted chains. He didn't sleep. At midnight, the first tremor hit. The floor shifted, only slightly, but enough for Grogmaw to feel it in his teeth. He stood, cleaver in hand, and moved toward the rear stairwell that led down to the old vaults. Another tremor, and then a sound, chittering, high-pitched, insectile. Wrong. He descended, one step at a time. The lanterns flickered as he moved through stone passages lined with mildew and rot. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow, steady rhythms. The air was tight, foul, like something had been living down here that shouldn't. Then he saw it. A hole, torn through the foundation, leading into blackness. And from it, eyes, red, beady, countless. The first thing leapt before he could blink, a blur of fur, fangs, and rusted metal. It wore armor cobbled together from scrap and filth. A sword was lashed to one wrist, curved and pitted. It shrieked in a tongue that scratched at Grogmaw's brain. "Men, nothing!" died. He caught it mid-leap and crushed its head against the wall. The skull caved with a sickening crack. It twitched once and was still. More poured from the tunnel. Skaven, filthy, rat-blooded monsters of the Under-Empire. Myths, if you believed the nobles. Grogmaw had seen too much to believe in myths. He fought like a storm in the dark. The first wave fell in a spray of gore. His cleaver rose and fell, hacking through twitching limbs, splitting skulls, turning bone to paste. The Skaven screamed, scrambled, swarmed, some wielding poisoned blades, others crude firearms that spat green flame. One shot scorched across Grogmaw's shoulder, searing through flesh. He roared, grabbed the shooter and bit through its throat, black blood spurting down his chest. He turned, cleaver spinning in a savage arc, and sliced 3 more in half. But they kept coming. They always came. From the shadows a figure emerged, taller, robed in dark fabric stitched with bone runes. A warlock engineer, cables drilled into its spine, lightning dancing at its claws. It hissed in triumph and leveled a device, part crossbow, part engine, part nightmare. The bolt struck Grogmaw in the gut. He staggered. Electricity tore through his nerves, dropping him to one knee. The Skaven howled in triumph. The warlock hissed again, mocking. Grogmaw's hand closed around a loose stone. He threw it. It struck the warlock's device dead on. It exploded in a flash of green fire. The engineer vanished in smoke and screams, its body scattered across the chamber. The others faltered. Grogmaw rose, bleeding, burned, unbroken. He waded through the survivors like a butcher through cattle, cleaver rising and falling in brutal rhythm. Limbs flew, tails severed. Screams echoed through the vault like the cries of damned children. When it was done, he stood alone. The tunnel gaped behind him, black, deep, full of answers no one wanted. He collapsed it. Stone by stone he smashed the entrance until nothing remained but ruin and dust. No one would believe the truth. Better they fear shadows. At dawn, Valsera found him sitting outside the warehouse, his armor scorched, one arm wrapped in blood-soaked linen. "It's done?" the noble asked, cautious. Grogmaw nodded. "What was it?" Grogmaw looked up at him and said only one word. "Rats." He took his coin and walked away, leaving the noble staring into the rising sun, unsure if it was a joke or a warning. Chapter 8. The Flame in Flesh. The alley bled. It was narrow, hemmed by ancient stone walls that leaned too close like eavesdropping giants. Rain slicked the cobbles in a dull sheen, and the puddles glimmered with the oil-slick sheen of blood and sewage. Portvenzia was silent that night. Too silent, like a city holding its breath. Grogmaw trudged alone, wrapped in a tattered cloak soaked through with salt and rot. His wounds still throbbed from the Skaven slaughter beneath the warehouse. The burn on his shoulder had scabbed over, the bolt wound in his gut sealed with poultice and grit. He limped, but each step was still thunder. He told himself he was leaving the city, but someone else had other plans. The ambush struck like a dagger in the ribs. The first blade sank between his shoulder blades, missing spine by an inch. A scream rose, half surprise, half triumph, and was silenced by a reflexive backhand that crushed the attacker's face into the wall with a splatter of bone and teeth. But more came. They wore rags soaked in blood and inked with warp sigils. Eyes wide with devotion, mouths sewn shut with wire. They moved not like warriors, but sacrifices given life and orders. Chaos cultists, the wretched coil, remnants of a bloodline cursed by forbidden rites, tied now to the verminous gods of the Skaven. They had been waiting. One leapt from a balcony above, dagger flashing green with warp taint. It tore a gash across Grogmaw's jaw. Another lunged low, aiming for his gut. He twisted, slowly, but enough, and caught the blade on his hip bone. The pain was white-hot. It struck back. His cleaver came up, slow but final, and split the cultist in two from clavicle to pelvis. Gore burst like wine from a bloated skin. Another tried to stab him from behind. He pivoted too late. The knife sank deep into the meat beneath his ribs. He roared, spun, bashed the cultist's spine with a shoulder slam that splattered him against the wall. But they kept coming. 6, 10, more shadows spilled into the alley like maggots from a wound. Grogmaw staggered, blood gushing from his side. His cleaver grew heavier in his grip. The rain turned red. A blade flashed for his throat. There was a song of steel, one sharp note like wind through glass, and the cultist's head spun clean from his shoulders. A figure moved through the carnage, barefoot and hooded, twin swords flashing like fireflies in the storm. Her movements were fluid, impossible, a dance of cuts and red ribbons. She didn't block, she glided, turned, twisted, letting blades slip past her skin by heartbeats. Every strike she made was precise. One motion, one death. When the last cultist fell, his blood pooling across the alley bricks, she turned to Grogmaw. She pulled back her hood. Her eyes were clouded white, unfocused. "I heard you breathing," she said, voice soft, calm. "You sound like thunder, even when you're dying." Sheathed her blades. I mailed her. "You owe me nothing, but I'd rather not watch you die just yet." The hideaway was deep in the cliffside quarter, an abandoned chapel to Myrmidia, its iconography defaced but the stones still strong. Grogmaw lay on a bed of straw, his wound cleaned and stitched with fine hands. Malvra moved around him silently, her fingers reading the walls, her body shifting with impossible grace. She lit incense with touch alone. "You fight like a rock slide," she said after a long silence. "Brutal, inevitable, but no direction, no shape, all weight, no mind." Grogmaw opened one eye. "It worked." "Barely," she replied, rinsing a cloth in steaming water. "And barely is not enough. Not for what hunts the likes of us." He looked at her, a blind woman, lean as a reed, her limbs coiled like rope. Her swords leaned against the altar. She moved like she could hear your thoughts before you breathed them. "You're no priest." She smiled without joy. "Was a sister of Myrmidia once. Swore to defend the weak, live with discipline, strike with purpose." She tightened the bandage around his ribs. "Now I do the same, but without the temple. Or the lies." She stepped back. "You want to survive what's coming, ogre. You need more than strength. You need intention. Not instinct, not anger. You need to see." He gestured at her eyes. "You don't." She leaned in close until her breath touched his face. "No. I listen. I feel. The world is always speaking. You're just too loud to hear it." The days passed. Grogmaw stayed. His wounds mended slowly, but under Malvra's guidance his body moved in new ways. They trained in silence. He learned to wait, to feel the shift in the air before a blow landed. She showed him how to place his feet, not just where the ground was strongest, but where it would force his enemy to stumble. He struck slower but sharper. No wasted movement, no blind rage. She taught him balance, how to move his weight, how to stop himself mid-swing and redirect. He learned how to read his enemy not with his eyes, but by breath, by sound, by the tremor in the floor. One evening, she bound a cloth around his eyes and placed a bell at his feet. "Don't let it ring." Then attacked. The fight was brutal. He swung wide, missed, bled, but the bell never moved. By dusk, he landed a strike, gentle but true, against her ribs. She nodded once, approval hidden in the tilt of her chin. "You're learning." He grunted. "I'm not done." "No," she said. "But now?" "You're beginning." On the seventh day they sat together in the chapel ruins, the sea crashing below them. "Where will you go?" she asked, running a whetstone over her sword's edge. "East," he rumbled. "Because the west is burning." She smiled. He looked at her. "You could come." "No," she said. "I have ghosts here. Ones I'm not done burying." He stood, slung his cleaver over his back. She stepped forward, placed a hand on his chest. "Remember, strength is not in falling slow. It's in knowing when to stop." He nodded and walked into the night. The bell never rang. Chapter 9. The Trial of Flame. The fires of Casbrak never went out. They burned from braziers along the rooftops, from the crucibles of forges choked with iron dust, from the grand chimney of the central kiln temple that poured smoke into the sky day and night. The town was built around heat, molten glass, tempered steel, and the kind of belief that warped minds as thoroughly as it did metal. Once a Tillan border town, Carbrook had been seized by zealots of Verena and Sigmar, fused into a sect called the Red Flame, who worshipped discipline, judgment, and purging through trial. Justice here wasn't served, it was fought. Malvra and Grogmaw arrived at dawn, ash falling like snow from the temple heights. Their path had wound through smuggler roads, ruined chapels, and miles of broken forest. Their words had grown fewer. At the edge of the town, Malvra stopped. "This is where we part." Grogmaw looked at her in silence. "Well, I've taught you all I can," she said, tying her hair back with a strip of red cloth. "Now you have to choose what kind of flame you are." She stepped forward and placed a hand on his cleaver. "Don't kill. Not this time." His brow furrowed. Because death is easy, discipline isn't." Then she turned and vanished into the mist. Grogmaw was taken in chains. Not as a prisoner, but as a contestant. He had walked into the trial hall, the ancient amphitheater where criminals, heretics, and warriors fought for judgment. Some fought for freedom, others to prove faith. The Red Flame had looked at him and seen a perfect spectacle, an outsider, a beast, a blunt hammer to test against their sharpened blades. 3 opponents. 3 trials. All within the same circle of scorched sand, surrounded by tiered seats, packed with fanatics, nobles, and bored merchants eager for blood. The chants of the crowd echoed across the walls, a constant roar of "burn him" and "bleed the beast." The first opponent was a flagellant, shirtless, covered in iron nails driven into his flesh like thorns. His eyes were wild, mouth foaming. He carried a chain mace soaked in pitch. When the bell rang, he charged. Grogmaw stepped aside. The chain swung wide, missed. The second time he caught the chain and ripped. The flagellant tumbled forward. Grogmaw pivoted, caught him by the back of the neck, and slammed him face-lurch into the sand. Once. Twice. Then stopped. The man lay still, unconscious but breathing, blood leaking from a broken nose and teeth. The crowd booed. "Coward!" someone screamed. "Kill him!" Grogmaw turned his back on them. The second trial was a sellsword, lean and quick, with a grin too wide for his face. He wielded a curved blade, stained from 100 fights. No words, just steel. The battle was faster. He danced around Grogmaw's swings, nicked his thigh, opened a shallow line across his arm. The ogre waited, watched, then stepped forward, not with fury, but purpose. He feinted left, drew the blade, then turned with a hip check that sent the swordsman flying. The man hit the wall, coughed blood, rose, only to find Grogmaw's fist already there. One punch, the kind that crumpled skulls. But Grogmaw pulled it at the last moment. The blow cracked the man's jaw, snapped 3 teeth, and dropped him into a twitching heap, but alive. The crowd screamed. Laid him. Shouted mercy. Sand churned under Grogmaw's boots. He stood still. His eye locked on the next gate. The 3rd gate creaked open. A woman entered. Young. Armored. Tattooed across her neck with the sigils of the flame. Her weapon, a halberd, etched with holy scripture. She stared at Grogmaw without fear. "I don't want to die," she said. "I won't kill you," he replied. "Then you'll lose." "No," he said. "I'll teach you." The bell rang. She struck like lightning. The halberd jabbed, slashed, twirled with brutal grace. She was trained, disciplined, fast, with faith in every motion. She opened a line along Grogmaw's cheek. He grunted, then responded. He didn't swing wildly. He stepped, measured, calm, caught the shaft mid-swing and twisted, turning her own weapon against her, forcing her off balance. She rolled away. Charged again. This time, Grogmaw sidestepped, grabbed her by the collar, and dropped her with a shoulder toss that shook the ground. She landed hard, didn't rise. Blood trickled from her nose, her ribs heaving. She blinked up at him, nodded. The crowd roared for death. Grogmaw turned, blood running down his arm, and walked to the center of the ring. The announcer, dressed in gold and red, lifted his voice. "Do you yield, beast?" Grogmaw stared at the sky, then at the crowd, and said nothing. The silence deepened. Boos followed. A spit, thrown fruit. He walked through it all, unflinching, bruised, unbroken. He stepped through the gates and back into the street. That night, as fires roared on the temple spires and the crowd roared for new blood, Grogmaw sat alone outside the walls. He laid his cleaver beside him, wiped blood from his mouth. The discipline burned inside him like a slow fire. Not bright, not glorious, but enduring. He touched the new bruise on his chest and closed his eyes. Malvar had said, "Know when to stop." And tonight he had, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Chapter 10. Navlars and gold. The mountain's breath was cold and thin, full of iron and memory. Grogmaw's path wound through cracked shale and frost-bitten trails that curled like veins across the bones of the world. No trees grew here, only wind-blasted lichen and the occasional black spire of rock jutting up like a broken fang. The air whistled like old ghosts. Snow clung to the corners of his armor, melting slowly as his body heat seeped into the stone beneath his boots. He had not eaten in 2 days. Not for lack of opportunity, but lack of hunger. Something else stirred in him now, a pull deeper than appetite. The trail ended at a narrow pass carved between 2 cliff faces. Someone had marked the stone with crude glyphs, stick-scratch runes, fang and fire symbols daubed in grease and blood. The work of noblers, the small, cunning, cowardly cousins of the goblin breed, subordinates, scavengers, and once servants to the ogres of Grogmaw's own kin. He paused at the threshold. Smoke curled from beyond the rocks. Laughter echoed, high-pitched and barking. A shrill screech of metal on stone. The scent of burnt meat and rotting pine sap filled the air. He moved forward. A horn wailed in alarm the moment his shadow fell across the camp. Dozens of green-skinned bodies scurried from tents, holes, and leaning shacks made of scavenged bone and rusted cookware. Some tripped over each other. Others dropped their spears and ran outright. But one didn't flee. A squat, broad-faced gobbler, in a robe made from stitched-together flags, raised his hands. "It is him," he cried, "The Maw-Walker returns!" Gasps followed. Then a moment of stunned silence. Then a surge. They fluttered around him, gibbering praise, tugging at his boots, laying down strips of cloth and teeth as offerings. One knelt and wept openly. Another offered a half-rotted halfling foot tied to a string. Grogmaw stood motionless as they gathered, dozens, maybe hundreds now. His breath steamed in the thin mountain air. The leader waddled forward, older, one ear bitten away, eyes bright and shifty. "I am Snagget," he said with reverence, "chief skitter of the Red Maw Splitters. We saw the smoke signs, heard the trail chants. We knew you would return." "I didn't," Grogmaw grumbled. Snagget blinked, then grinned wider. "You're humble, even better." The Navlars bowed as one. Their voices chanted in broken harmony. "Wall of blood, maw of flame, cleaver king. Wall of blood, maw of flame," and rang in his skull like a bell of old iron. They gave him meat, charred chunks of beast flesh, served on dented shields. A goblet of fermented goat milk so foul it nearly moved on its own. They brought gold, rusted, bitten, stolen, and laid it in heaps near his feet. One even tried to crown him with a helm made from a horse's skull. He refused it all. He ate little, spoke less. Still they watched him like disciples. That night, as the fire pit roared and drums thumped with chaotic rhythm, Snagget approached again. "We were broken," the Navlar said quietly, seating himself beside Grogmaw on a slab of cracked stone. "The old tribe shattered when the Skywatcher died. No one strong left, just us, clinging, waiting. But you could rebuild, be chief, be more." He looked up, wide-eyed. "They'll follow you, fight for you, die for you." Grogmaw stared into the flames. His cleaver leaned against the stone beside him, red with old blood, the edge notched from countless strikes. The thought lingered. A warband, a legacy, a path of fire carved through the world, ending at the feet of empires. He could be a name again. He could be followed. He could matter. Then he spoke. "I am not a chieftain." Snagget's grin faltered. "But you could be." "No." Grogmaw rose slowly, every movement casting shadows across the fire-lit walls. "You want a leader. I'm still learning how to walk." The Navlars whispered, murmured. Some wailed softly, others hissed in confusion. Snagget bowed his head. "Then take this." He reached into a pouch at his side and drew out a mask, crudely carved from bleached bone. It was shaped like Grogmaw's face, blunt, heavy-browed, with hollow eyes and a jagged mouth. The edges were scorched. Symbols were etched across the cheeks: pain, fire, silence. "Heal." "We made it," Snagget said. "To remember. Not to wear. No lies on it, just what was." Grogmaw took it in his massive hand, held it to the firelight. The surface was rough beneath his calloused fingers. The lines were crude. But it was honest, brutal, earned. He nodded once, then turned, walked away from the fire, away from the crowd, into the darkness at the edge of the camp. The mask hung from his belt now, not as a crown, not as a trophy, but as a mark of what had passed, and what still waited beyond the stone and snow. As he vanished between the rocks, the Navlars knelt once more, not in joy, but in silence. Chapter 11. The bell tolls east. The world's edge mountains rose like the jagged spine of a dead god, their peaks lost in clouds bruised purple by dusk. Wind howled between the crags, dragging with it the echo of far-off avalanches and voices long since buried under ice and time. Snow clung to the higher passes in thick, broken slabs, while the lower slopes wept meltwater that turned the paths to sludge and stone. Grogmaw trudged onward. His boots were soaked through, his scars ached in the cold. The bone mask at his belt thumped gently against his thigh with each step. He moved with purpose, but not haste, his eyes scanning the trail, his nostrils twitching at every gust. The path narrowed through a ravine cut deep between cliffs. That's where he heard them. Not warriors, not beasts. Chanting. Low. Measured. Melancholic. Then, coughing, weeping, the creak of wheels. He rounded the bend and saw them. A caravan, 5 wagons and a dozen or so people, their robes tattered, their skin burned red by wind and exposure. Most were monks, shaved bald, marked with the twin-tailed comet of Sigmar. Others bore the quill of Verena, or the crescent of Shalia. Holy men and women, refugees of a god-broken age. They turned as he approached, faces tightening in fear and awe. The leader stepped forward, a tall, gaunt man, wrapped in ink-stained linen, a thick book chained to his waist. Spectacles sat cracked on his nose, and his hands trembled not from fear, but fever. He bowed his head. "You are no brigand," he said softly. "Not with that walk. I've seen too many die to steal from the living," Grogmaw grumbled. The man nodded. "Then may I ask you something heavier than coin?" Grogmaw looked at him, expression unreadable. "We are fleeing the east," the man explained, "from a crusade twisted by ruin. Knights once blessed by the gods now burn villages in Sigmar's name. They've taken the banner of holy war and soaked it in blood and madness. Chaos. Not pure, not yet, but touched. Enough that they no longer see heresy and fire." He gestured to the wagons. "We carry books, relics, testimonies. Not gold, not arms, just words. And they've sworn to silence every one of us." Grogmaw looked past him. The monks were gaunt, yes, but not hopeless. One carried a broken bell, its clapper missing. Another gently cradled a bundle wrapped in sheepskin, a scroll, maybe, or a scripture. They flinched under his gaze, but did not break. "Where are you going?" "To the old dwarfen roads," the scholar replied. "There's a pass through the mountains. If we make it there, we can reach the Karaz gates. The dwarfs, if they still honor our pact, may shelter us." "Too many roads," Grogmaw said. "Too many shadows." The scholar straightened. "I won't ask you to fight, just to walk with us, until we reach the pass." Grogmaw said nothing, then nodded. The journey took 3 days. They moved slowly, always uphill, the wagons groaning with weight. Grogmaw walked ahead, cleaver on his back, gaze sweeping the cliffs and tree lines. The cold bit harder the higher they climbed. The monks sang to keep warm. Old verses, once sung in stone cathedrals, now rasped out on broken breath and bleeding lips. On the second night they heard horns. Not orcish, not imperial. Crusader. The air stank of smoke and sanctified oil. The screams came with the dawn. Grogmaw smelled them before he saw them. A band of knights, black armor etched with scripture, purity seals flapping like dying birds. Their faces were pale with zeal, mouths chanting even as blood painted their lips. One bore a torch wrapped in flayed skin. Another dragged a woman behind him, her legs broken. They saw the caravan and charged. Grogmaw didn't wait. He met them halfway. The first knight's war cry was cut short as Grogmaw's cleaver sheared through his horse's neck. The beast collapsed in a wet heap, crushing its rider beneath. Another swung a flanged mace. Grogmaw caught it on his shoulder, grunted as bone cracked, then rammed his forehead into the knight's helm. The metal caved with a screech. Blood poured down the zealot's face as he dropped, twitching. The leader came forward, sword raised high, a halo of nails strapped around his skull. In the name of the flame ascendant. Grogmaw grabbed his wrist, snapped it, and drove the cleaver down into the man's chest. The blade stuck in bone. Grogmaw left it there, grabbing the knight's own sword, and turned it back on the next attacker, driving it up under the man's breastplate, and twisting until his guts spilled in steaming ropes. 2 more fled. Grogmaw didn't pursue. He went to the woman behind the knight's horse. Alive, barely. Her leg was pulp. A monk took her, weeping. The caravan rolled on, faster now. No one spoke of what Grogmaw had done. Not even him. By the 3rd night they reached the pass. A dwarfen arch stood at the threshold. Old, cracked, half buried in snow. Runes lined its edges, half erased by time, but Grogmaw could still see them. Honor. Endurance. Memory. The scholar came to him. "We can make it from here," he said, voice hoarse. "You've done more than enough." He reached for a pouch, pulled free a ring of gold stamped with the seal of Verena. "For your service." Grogmaw looked at it, then shook his head. "No coin." The scholar blinked. Then, "Why?" Grogmaw looked past him, at the monks tending to the books, the wounded, the wary. "Because what you carry still matters." He turned to go. The scholar called out, one last time. "Your name, should I record it?" Grogmaw didn't stop walking. The bell, clapperless, was struck once behind him. It echoed through the pass like a heartbeat, then faded. Chapter 12. The Eye Beneath the Stone. The wind shrieked like a dying bird across the cliffs, driving shards of ice into the skin like thrown knives. Snow came sideways in thick, blinding sheets, drowning the sun and sky in a haze of white fury. Grogmaw trudged through it like a living monolith, hunched against the gale, each step dragging knee-deep drifts. His cloak snapped like a torn sail, half frozen to his back. His cleaver hung low, heavy with frost and silence. The pass behind him was gone, buried in the storm. Ahead, jagged rock broke the white like a knife through flesh. The ruins of a Karak, once a dwarfen stronghold, now long dead and half swallowed by the mountain itself. Black stone columns jutted from the slope like broken ribs. The entrance yawned wide, devouring the wind and snow and darkness. Shelter, but not safety. He entered. The air inside was dead. No wind, no snow, no warmth. He able to just dust. The ceiling loomed low, reinforced with crumbling runes and corroded steel struts. Mosaics long defaced sprawled across the floor, their tiles cracked and disjointed. Statues of long-forgotten kings watched from niches in the wall, eyes hollowed, beards shattered, mouths worn to smooth absence. Grogmaw moved through the dark like a shadow of the past, boots grinding bone dust and rusted iron. The tunnels curved inward, deeper into the belly of the mountain. He lit no torch. He trusted his instincts. He knew how to listen. But even so, he almost missed the breath. It was not a sound. It was felt, like the mountain inhaled. The hairs on his arms rose. His grip tightened on the cleaver. The tunnel walls pulsed faintly with damp, no water, but sweat. The air stank of hot stone, wet meat, and something older than language. He descended a staircase that led nowhere, and then further, and then again, until the air felt thick with wrongness. Then he found it. A chamber, round and wide, carved into the mountain's root. At the center stood a stone altar, cracked and blackened, ringed in old dwarfen runes that had long since been overwritten with glyphs that crawled if stared at too long. And above it, set into the ceiling, an eye. It wasn't real, not entirely. It was made of stone and metal, a sculpture perhaps, but it blinked. Once, slowly, watching. Then came the voice, not in his ears, not in the air, and in his mind. You bleed for a world that does not want you. Grogmaw took a step back. You carry scars that will never heal, pain that will never end. Would you see it end? The voice was many voices, overlapping. Male, female, beast, child, always whispering from just behind the veil of thought. Take the gift. Carve your name into the roots of the world. Let them know you. The altar shone, a sick, pulsing glow, red like butcher's blood, alive with potential. The stone cracked further, revealing something beneath. Not gold, not bone. Heart. It beat once, and the room groaned. Grogmaw staggered, clutching his head. His vision swam. The eye blinked again, wider now. He saw flashes in his mind. Massive himself atop a mountain of corpses, wreathed in flame, eyes glowing, cities bowing before his stride. His name carved in brass across the gates of a burning Altdorf. His body no longer scarred and broken, but armored in living metal, his cleaver alive with fire. Eternal, worshipped. No. He roared and slammed his cleaver into the floor, cracking the stone. You could be more, the voice screamed, now 1,000 mouths at once. You could be forever. He bared his teeth. Enough. And brought the cleaver down on the altar. Stone shattered. Blood, not his, exploded outward in steaming torrents. The hearts split like rotten fruit. The eye above screamed, not with sound, but a vibration that cracked teeth and flayed the skin of his thoughts. He fell backward, coughing blood as the chamber collapsed. Stone broke. The floor gave way. Heat surged. The world became a torrent of darkness, pain, and screaming, not all of it his own. When he awoke, he could no longer tell how much time had passed. Snow dusted his face. He lay at the mouth of the Karak again, the wind cold and sharp, the storm past. His armor was torn, his cloak burned away, his cleaver lay beside him, blackened but whole. And carved into his chest, not by blade, not by burn, but beneath the skin, was a symbol. Spiral of flame around an eye, faint but pulsing. He tore his bandages and scraped at it until blood ran. It remained. Not a blessing, not a curse. Immortal. He rose, unsteady, silent. The world stretched before him, vast and cold. The stone behind him wept. No blood. But beneath the wind, something laughed. One scintilled quietly, then faded. Chapter 13. Beneath no banner. The light above the tree line burned dim and copper red as Grogmaw stirred on a bed of pine needles, furs, and the smell of smoke. His eyes opened slowly, crusted with blood, breath wheezing in raw, ragged pulls. His limbs felt like lead. Pain lingered in every joint, not fresh, but settled, like coals long since burned through, yet still hot beneath the ash. The wound across his chest, where the mark now pulsed, itched and throbbed like a second heart. It had not healed. The faces above him were unfamiliar, hardened, weather-worn. Human, not priests, not zealots, not soldiers anymore. They were dressed in a patchwork of leathers and mail, scavenged helms and dented cuirasses, none bearing crest or sigil. Their eyes held no fear, no reverence, only the flat stare of men who'd seen too much and decided it meant nothing. "About time," said the one closest, a bearded man with a broken nose and a blade notched with use. "We figured you were dead. Would have buried you with your blade, if we thought you'd stay down." Grogmaw didn't reply. "Didn't Maneater." "Name's Harvick," the man continued. "This sorry lot, you see. What's left of the red shields, blue banners, and gods know what else. We served kings, lords, sigils, until we figured out none of them bleed any different." He grinned without warmth. "Now we follow no one." The camp was buried deep in the woods, cloaked in mist and moss. Tents made from wolf hides and scavenged sails, cooking fires ringed with shattered shield rims. They moved with practiced silence, a pack of blades without a leash, hands never far from hilts. Grogmaw watched them as his strength returned, how they drilled without orders, drank without songs, hunted without cause. They were wolves turned inward, soldiers stripped of belief. They called themselves the Unbound. Harvick offered him a place. "You've walked long enough alone," he said one night, tossing a haunch of roasted boar onto Grogmaw's stone plate. "You're no knight, no crusader, not even a true Maneater by the look of you, just a killer with nowhere to aim." He leaned forward, eyes glinting in the firelight. "Join us. No oaths. No kings, no gods. Just strength. Shared. Used." Grogmaw chewed slowly. "Swallowed. I walked my own road." Harvick smirked. "This is your road now. You just don't know it." They began testing him. Subtle at first. Suggestions. Challenges. Masked as camaraderie. A training bout with a two-handed axeman. A silent dare to join a raid on a merchant train. A shared bottle laced with something that made men dream in screams. Grogmaw said little. He did not strike, but the way he stared, stone still, fire reflecting in his dark eye, was enough to quiet the boldest tongue. Until one broke. A man named Rolf, tall and lean, with a sword curved like a butcher's cleaver and scars webbing his face like broken glass. His pride had been wounded by Grogmaw's silence. His kind needed noise, applause, blood. "You think you're better than us," he spat one night, loud enough to draw the eyes of all. Grogmaw looked up from his stew. Rolf stepped forward, jabbing a finger at the ogre's chest. "You walk like you got gods whispering in your ears. But I see it. That mark on you, that's no trophy. That's taint. You're cracked, big man, just like the rest of us. You just don't want to admit it." He stepped back, drawing his blade in a smooth arc. "Let's break the silence." The others didn't stop him. This was how the Unbound settled truth. Grogmaw stood. He didn't roar, didn't posture. He just moved. The cleaver came off his back in a blur for something so massive. The edge caught the firelight. Dull, dark, final. Rolf lunged, quick and mean. Grogmaw, he took the blow, let it glance off the thick bone of his shoulder, and then he grabbed Rolf by the neck, lifted him. The man kicked, screamed. Grogmaw didn't flinch. He brought him down, spine first across his knee. The crack echoed like a tree snapping in a storm. Rolf spasmed once. Then nothing. Grogmaw let the body drop. The others stood in silence, not afraid, not angry. Yes, watching. Harvick exhaled. "You didn't have to kill him." "I didn't." And they knew it was true. Rolf still breathed, bare, but his legs would never move again. Grogmaw turned to Harvey. "Not yours." He picked up his pack, slung the cleaver across his back, and walked out of the firelight. No one followed. No one called after. They just watched as the giant disappeared into the dark, beneath no banner, beneath no god. Along with certain. Chapter 14. The Anvil of the East. The eastern winds were sharp with the bite of stone dust and iron smoke as Grogmaw followed the winding path toward the fortress known as Karak von Haldir, the last dwarf hold before the range broke into wildlands and ruin. It rose from the mountainside like it had been hewn from the bones of the world itself. Thick, squat towers crowned with bronze domes shimmered faintly through the mist. The gates were engraved with runes older than empires, guarded by statues of ancestor kings with axes buried in their laps and judgment carved into their brows. As Grogmaw approached, the heavy gates ground open with a sound like groaning mountains. He entered not as a beggar nor a beast, but as a warrior of blood-earned name. The hold had heard of him, through whispers from refugees, traders, road priests. The silent wall of Dregmouth, the flame-bearer, the cleaver of the Black Cross. His deeds had reached them long before his tread. At the gate stood Thane Durgrim's stone fist, broad as a forge anvil, beard braided in 3 silver bands, one eye ruined and sealed with gold wire. He appraised Grogmaw with the calm of someone who'd seen 1,000 warriors and buried half of them. "You're a wall," Durgrim said. "A fortress of flesh, but even stone must rest." He offered a hand, not in welcome but in recognition. "We have use for your strength. Our walls are tall, our forges deep, but we lack the muscle for what comes from below." Grogmaw didn't reply. He didn't need to. The hold buzzed with quiet industry, dwarfs moving with rhythm and purpose, axes honed, armor tempered, statues maintained. Here the world had order. There was a rhythm to the stone, a heartbeat to the anvils, a life that didn't burn out in screaming or betrayal. Durgrim led him through the heart of the hold, past temples of runes and molten steel, past barracks where young dwarfs trained in silence, eyes hard as obsidian, past the anvil hall, where the names of the dead were struck into iron slabs and hung for eternity. "Take the oath," the Thane said. He spoke it simply, without ceremony. "The oath of stone. To stand when others break, to fight not for glory or coin, but for the endurance of the hold, for shield brothers and hearth walls, for the memory of what was and the future of what must be." The offer was clear. A place, a purpose, a home. That night they gave him quarters carved from granite and cedar wood. A fire burned low. Meat and mead had been left untouched beside his bed. He sat alone, gut plate resting on the stone floor before him. In his hand, a chisel. Dwarfen made, true steel. The gut plate bore many marks now, etched deep into the darkened metal, each one a story, a scar, a vow. Dregmouth, Screaming Hill, Blightroot, Karsbrug, a crude spiral scratched over his heart, the eye he could not forget. And now, beneath them all, he carved one more. Oh, deliberately. Oh, the rune of Endure. It was not ornate, not perfect, but it was his, scratched into the steel, not as an oath to a hold, but to himself. To walk when others stop, to stand when no one calls his name. He stared at the rune for a long time, then at the walls around him, strong, silent, comforting. For the first time in years, his hand trembled. He could stay. Be a wall, not a weapon. He could die in the dark beside dwarfs who would remember his name, be carved into stone, forged into memory, no longer rootless. He closed his eyes and saw fire, not hearth fire, battle, screams, cities burning, innocents dragged beneath banners, cults in the dark. Skaven claws. Daemon whispers. He saw roads, not walls. He saw a need. Gidnu. He rose before dawn. Left behind the cleaver's scabbard the dwarfs had made for him. Left behind the ring of iron runes set aside for his name. He strapped his gutplate to his chest, the rune still fresh, still raw. He walked through the empty hold in silence, the echo of his steps the only farewell. Thane Durgrim met him at the gate, said nothing, only nodded once, with respect, with understanding, and the doors opened again. The wind howled, and Grogmaw walked out, the mountain behind him, alone, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because the world still needed walls where there were none. Chapter 15. The Road Beyond Names. The wind at the edge of the world spoke in tongues older than language. It howled across the high plateau with the force of eternity, dragging sleet and broken whispers down from the jagged peaks of the eastern World's Edge mountains. The sky above was bruised purple, torn with streaks of lightning that danced like silver cracks across a dying canvas. Thunder rolled across the vastness like the drumbeat of some forgotten god, and there, alone on the precipice, stood Grogmaw. He was still, colossal, a shape of iron and scarred flesh silhouetted against the roiling dark. Snow clung to his shoulders and beard. The wind bit through his cloak, but he did not shiver. His cleaver rested across his back, dulled now by years of ruin, the handle worn smooth by war. The gutplate, etched with runes of fire, silence, endurance, caught a flicker of lightning, casting his shadow long and jagged over the broken earth. Below him sprawled the broken lands. There was no map for what lay ahead, only memory and storm. He had walked far, across slaughtered coasts and burnt cities, through poison woods and fallen temples, under banners that meant nothing, and above graves that would never be named. He had carried corpses, smashed cults, refused crowns, faced daemons, men, beasts, and the ache of being alone. They spoke of him now, in the places he had left. In Dregmouth, children whispered of the ogre who stood when the sea screamed. In Riva's hold, they recited his name beside their war chants, though they never understood him. The monks of Karsbrook rang a bell without a clapper in his honor. The dwarfs of Vornhaldir had carved a rune for Endura beside their ancestor shrines, though no name marked the stone. And in dark corners of the empire and beyond, mercenaries and outcasts spoke in hushed tones about a thing with a bone mask and a stare like a tomb's last breath, something that crushed without cruelty and walked away without words. To some he was a brute, and to others a phantom. To a few he was a lesson. Behind him a trail of blood and memory. Before him the storm. He moved, not down, not toward any visible road, but forward, into the mist that swallowed paths and names alike. Each step was heavy, but sure. The wind pressed against him, relentless. He leaned into it. The tree. And still he walked. He bore no banner, carried no coin, wore no lord's sigil, but on his chest, beneath the armor, beneath the skin, the mark remained, not the one left by daemons, but the one he'd carved himself. Endure. Above him, lightning split the sky again, white and violent, illuminating the peaks like jagged teeth. His shadow vanished into the storm, and the road continued.